Hello and welcome to Clutch or Kick episode 10. There's a lot to talk about, and we've got a special guest as well, a new face to the show, Joe Edwards, goes by the alias of Strong, 2 times NALCS champion in terms of coaching as well. Just a general absolute genius when it comes to the European Valorant scene as well. So happy to have you, Joe. Thanks for coming on, man.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And a lot of topics to get through today, and of course the usual suspects as well. We kicked Matt off the show because last episode was just not good from him. So I don't know if we'll be having him for a while yet.
Performance-based podcasting.
Yeah, we got me back on as well. We're just we're trialing, knocking people in and out. But let's kick off with the patch that just came out. It was a little tiny patch, 1.08. Not too many changes, honestly, across the board. The major thing being the Raze satchel pack nerf. So another nerf to Raze's satchel pack after they said that they didn't. They kind of, I suppose, felt like it wasn't being used how they thought it would when they designed the ability. So they've removed a lot of the damage, and it now has a ramp up so that it initially when you use it, it does absolutely bollocks all. It does 15 damage, I think. And then after that, it ramps up to 50 if you leave it. But let's be real, who the hell is leaving it,
That does sometimes happen, though. You'll occasionally want to throw a satchel just to stop someone coming into that area. And now that they've made it so that you can't kill the blast pack, that is actually a fairly effective deterrent. Like if you're trying to lock off some small choke point that you don't want to be pushed from behind, you just throw a blast pack there and it'll, it's a little bit of a deterrent to people. If you shoot it, it deads it now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it doesn't just destroy it. So yeah, it's an interesting change. But I've always felt like, we've seen some of the best Raze players in the world, players like Zipan as well, really kind of innovate, I would say, with the way that they were using the satchels, just getting the maximum amount of the kit. But it seems like they purely want it to be kind of, I suppose, a deterrent, something to clear angles, something to use as the mobility.
Yeah. Nice little change, I think, that it no longer does damage to allies. Small change, but it is nice for those situations where you're pushing through a choke and you have players around you. You can get in before them with a jump, so... Small change, but I like that.
Yeah.
Or ever playing matchmaking.
Say again, Joe.
Or ever playing matchmaking.
Yeah, actually just knocking your teammates. I'm a Raze one trick, so I do that all the time anyway. The Guardian got a buff as well in terms of...
cool. Sure, it's going to be picked up.
I
like it, but but are people going to use it?
Oh, I need to see a comparison video.
But maybe.
I could see. To be honest, I could see it being more significant than people think, because it's down from 2,700 where it was initially to 2,500 now, to 2,500 to 2,400.
Yeah,
and I kind of feel like it's now in that range, and it's like you can say it's 100 off, but this does make a difference if you think about the goal to a win on a round is 3,000, right? So it's now in that space. That extra 100 might put it in the space where it's like, okay, I'm seriously thinking about buying this on a round 1 win now.
Mm-hmm.
And that could actually be hugely significant because, right now it feels like, it does feel a bit like, okay, if I've won round 1, well, 1, you don't feel in a great situation, you don't feel in the greatest position, right? But 2, you're like, basically like, okay, well, great, I'm either going to stick with the guns I kind of bought in pistol, mainly if I got a sheriff, right? Or I'm going to go get probably a Spectre, and it's kind of boring. It's like, oh, well, great, I've got this gun now, and if I win the round, they have to really take that on to the next round, blah blah blah. And you don't really have a variety of options with regards. Okay, and if you're the enemy team, okay, they're going to either have a Sheriff or a Spectre, basically. So I feel like putting it into that range where a winning team can buy it on round 1 actually could really open up dynamic with regards to how we see those round 2s play out, I think. So I'm quite interested to see. Obviously, the problem has been just it's not strong enough, but
yeah, perhaps. I still think I think it might need a even slightly more of a price reduction, maybe to 2,300 to really start seeing play. I think the only issue I have with it in the early rounds is that it's the type of weapon that at least you would think I wouldn't want to see it against Spectres, just due to the way that the gun actually works. It's not good against SMGs, people that are mobile, right? So
I need to see it being shot. I sent you a video, Kurt, in the channel, and it's the Korean Valorant channel on YouTube where they do the patch
so
comparisons.
good. Yeah,
they are
that's
so
good.
good.
Right?
I haven't watched this one yet, so
can they just translate those into English? Like, what? The English team must have those videos somewhere. Like, Riot's making them.
You would think, right? I mean, they are absolutely nasty. They're so good. But apparently, this is the norm in Korea with games, is that they just do these comparisons, so you can see the actual changes they're going through here. But I haven't seen the Guardian changes yet. That will be my kind of indication as well. The money is going to be the biggest factor, obviously, as well. It's like you were saying, Joe, when you come off the back of that first win, that round 1 win, and the money situation is like, well, do you want to buy? You buy a Spectre, right? Or maybe if you manage to get 3 kills and you got the $600 from it, then you might.
I mean, the Bulldog
buy
is
a
also.
rifle.
I think the Bulldog is like the most direct comparison, though.
Yes,
as a 2100
yes,
weapon that is also fairly decent at long range with the ADS, where, you know, to a similar level to the Guardian, you still got to hit the headshot either way if you're playing against actual rifles. But the people don't really like spraying with the Bulldog. So if the recovery time is low enough with the Guardian, which I think we're about to see here, then maybe it could be viable for a little bit more money.
See,
also great for wall banging as well, for like a Sova playing on Ascent or something. There aren't excuses.
That is a good point. See, I always see the Guardian being more viable in situations later in the game where you're stretching your money and trying to get a buy-in for a round, where it's the type of gun that I would actually like to use against players who are using rifles later and trying to stretch out my money and potentially get the Guardian over a Bulldog if the credit requirement to get the Guardian is lower, right?
Yeah, I mean, why would you not want just an Ares, though, as well? If you were playing, I'm thinking back on like Ascent B, if you're playing Sova, why would you not just pick up the Ares buy? I don't know.
Instead of the Guardian?
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to retake A.
I feel like it's more for stuff like split B, stuff like that. That's sort of split B in a retake scenario.
Right.
Yeah, obviously, with Ascent, you're never giving up the Ares. you're or the Odin or whatever. You're keeping that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are definitely places where the wallbang could come into use now. So
interesting change. I mean, we'll have to see how it shakes out, to be honest, because yeah. I mean, I don't really know how the numbers would add up in terms of that. Another thing, the map rotation changes.
Hallelujah.
Thank God, yeah. I mean, the amount of times that you would just have an entire day of playing only split. I mean, hopefully you're going to be in the past now with this, because they changed it instead of it being random to pseudo-random. So it's, I mean, we could get into the pedantics of that, of there's no such thing as random in computing, but I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. There's only such thing as pseudo-random. So
no, it was true random. There were Riot employees rolling dice and telling you exactly what map was coming up. They have just a whole wing of Riot employees that are sat there rolling dice.
Yeah, just deciding what map you get next. Except for the ones when they're watching my stream and they're like, right, we'll put him on split again. He's tilted, bogged on the phone, just fucking watching it. Yeah, I mean, a good change, just... Yeah. I think for the nature of the game, and they made some observer changes as well in the quality of life. What is this here?
This is one is so
for the
good.
Flashes.
Yeah, especially with the 3 breach flashes just blinding all 100,000 blast viewers over and over again. It's a lovely change. Thank you, Riot.
Yeah, this was, I mean, did you see the clip that Zipan posted? And it was actually on the stream as well, where all 6 breach flashes got used on B bind long because they were counter flashing, right? Which is a very valid strat. So it's like one flash goes out and you're incentivized to reply with your own breach flash. And so there's just 6 of them going off at once, and Zipan's like, just all in his face, can't do a thing.
Yeah, it's. Yeah, the new breach meta that we're in. Fucking hell. I was watching some of, I mean, we're going to get into it later, but some of the Liquid's VODs when they're running the 7 flashes as well.
Yeah,
it does get a little bit mental.
Here's the Zipan VOD.
As well.
Yeah.
This is from his point of view, but this is pretty similar to what all the spectators saw as well.
Oh my God.
And then he dies.
I like that, man. Well, they really went all out with this one, didn't they?
How long is this?
Full production value with this meme, bro.
The FBX budget out of control.
So it's not indirectly in this patch here, but one thing that we have been seeing, we've seen a tournament now, especially with the Blast Invitational being played. What do we make of Sage as a character? Because she got gutted in the not the latest patch, but the previous patch to that. So almost every single aspect of her kit got gutted completely. And I just watched the recent finals between G2 and FPX, at least some of the maps, because I didn't have time otherwise. But the maps that I did see, when G2 were playing the Sage, it felt like it was just a weaker option in comparison to some of the alternatives. I don't know if you guys get the same impression, but I can only see it being used in some very niche situational maps, maybe just on Split, honestly, just because of the basis of the way Split plays.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they were opting specifically for David P. He was running the Sage on Ascent of all maps. And we did see Xiao playing the Sage on Split, which on paper seems to make a lot more sense, as you said. No? Do you guys agree with that?
I mean,
oh, go on, Joe.
I'm saying with David P and Sage, that's kind of just a David P thing. The way he plays that map is he loves to lurk that mid position, and it just happens Sage has the best kit essentially for doing that. So that's really just a specific thing to him essentially. But yeah, I mean, something I will say, it actually really annoys me because so the particular change I think that's gutted her is the 60% change, right? Or 60 health change.
Yes.
It was 100 before, down to 60. And it really annoyed me because this was something I was saying like during beta. I was, okay, if you want to fix Sage, the starting place you have to go from is to get her down to, I think I ever said 60 or 66. Like, or 60 or 66% of missing health. Because at that point, you make it so, because the half the problem was, okay, if you get shot by Sage and you take a lot of damage and you're basically dead and you get healed up, you can still take 2 bullets before dying from a rifle. If you change it to 60%, you no longer have that problem. If you just go down to nothing and you get healed by the Sage, you're just going to die on one shot, basically, right? But the fact that they changed that last was really frustrating because I feel like they should have changed that first, and then they wouldn't have had to nerf the rest of the kit so heavily. I think you would have found that Sage would have become a lot more manageable a lot more quickly, in my view.
I think that
it was very much a gutting.
If you look at the statistics of her usage, they were already going fairly heavily down anyway, as people realized that Sage's compositions were very viable and had kind of learned how to play those. Because there is always some kind of meta inertia where people start, they think that Sage is a must pick, so they learn how to play the game with Sage, and it takes some relearning process for you to learn the best ways of playing without her. So we were already starting to get into that territory with some of the nerfs and relearning that people had done. And now in the BLAST Invitational, which is our only real data point after this nerf, she's down to 16% playtime, with the majority of the play, honestly, coming from Ascent, coming from G2.
Yeah.
Now, that's only 4 teams. It's not a big sample size. It's not easily readable, but I would think that that's going to occur on everywhere else to an even higher degree, because like you said, Joe, it really is only David P that plays the Sage in that kind of way. Even if you look at how other Sages played on Ascent, and it wasn't even that popular a map for Sage anyway, none of the others were playing aggressively with their slow orbs in B main, taking B main control. Basically, the only other teams that play for B main control use the Sova Dart to be able to do it. So there aren't really any other teams that use their Sage with aggressive walls and aggressive slows that feel confident enough to take those duels, that even play the map in that way. Now, I love it. I think that's a great way of playing Ascent because it allows you to take aggressive control over B, whereas most teams in NA, they just into gelato over and over again, which is
and mold
so
on the internet.
It's so much more one-dimensional than G2's style, which is one of the reasons that I think they're the best team in the world on Ascent. But I don't think you'll see anybody else do it. And they don't run it anywhere else.
I will say, I was watching, that was one of the last maps I watched was G2 versus FPX on Ascent. I watched that, and I watched the final map on Split, which was just pure fucking anarchy towards the end. It was absolute anarchy. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing, but I wanted to get a good feel for the Sage comps in particular, and FPX, and I think a lot of other teams should as well at this point, have a very good read. If you see a Sage on Ascent, you kind of know what's going to happen. If you hear the wall in B main, you know they're peeking into the window. If you hear, if you know to watch out as well, the common spot being trying to get your opper on a high ground position to watch the cross into cat.
Yeah.
Like with that wall, and also David P, like you were saying, Joe, he likes to play the cross with the wall behind the wall, just so that only his head's peeking up where he can hold it with an op just straight down mid. Like it's. If you've already got a solid read and you know how they're going to be playing around with the Sage, I feel like you've inherently taken away every single advantage that you've really had going for you by picking that character in the first place, by picking that agent. And in some ways, you'd be better off by playing the breach. Because, I mean, why would you not play the breach at the moment? With one extra flash, with the amount of utility he's got, with his stuns being buffed and knocking people out of scopes, it just doesn't quite make sense to me when I was seeing other teams play Ascent in this particular way.
I really like it, though, because I think that something you're underrating there is the fact that in order to find where David P is using his wall, because it could be, if we're talking defensively, it could be at the back of mid in order to get that peak. It could be in pizza in order to boost Mixwell up to be able to watch mid. And then on offense, it can be in B main, or it can be in order to watch the catwalk at the beginning. In order to find that out, you normally have to peak one of those angles, and there's going to be an op or an off angle watching you. So it puts a huge amount of pressure on you to be able to scout the usage of the wall without dying to the person that is peeking on the wall. And unless your Sova is in the right place at the right time to be able to catch out with a recon dart or a drone or something, it's still pretty unpredictable playing against the Sage wall. So I think that combined with B main control is pretty good, honestly.
Yeah, there was a scenario that I had in my mind when I was talking about that, though, and it was when G2 were trying to push into B main, and they had Xiao was playing right back side of an Odin, and he called that they had walled. So immediately Angel knew to just peek it, look at the window, pre-fire it, and he killed Mixwell instantly. And it's like, this is the kind of reads and adaptations that teams are going to do against you if they know what you're going for, essentially. And if they hear that wall sound, they're going to know what to look for. Those kind of, that's just stuff that you learn from prep. That's not even like mid-game adaptations. That's stuff that you just know from watching G2. So I do feel as time goes on, like the breach would be a more flexible pick, because they're going to be a little bit too one-dimensional in the way that they're running it. Could be proven wrong by that. I mean, they did get absolutely trounced on that map by FPX, and I think that was a big part of it. But yeah, that's my take on it, at least.
Yeah,
I mean, I think. Yeah, go on.
I think in my opinion, I feel like G2 have got away with a lot more than they should have on the Ascent over the last 2-3 tournaments. Like I think if you go back and look at it, bonk in Mandatory Cup played them probably the best of anybody, and then bonk actually probably. Bonk played them worse. I mean, but statistically they played them worse. But I think even in terms of how they approach it, they played them worse going into the next couple of tournaments. I feel like they naturally should be the best Ascent team in the world, but I do think that they're going to have to make that adaptation because, it's weird. I don't know why they haven't been tested really on this map, because what they do with regards to, particularly with regards to the B long play, is very, very predictable, and it has surprised me that people haven't exploited it until now.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of shifted this conversation into more G2, but I mean, do you guys think there is a place for Sage, or do you think that she just, at this point, she has been nerfed into the gutter? She needs a buff, or what?
I mean, I think it's interesting to see the game without her for a while, but I mean, they said that they're opening up that niche for more healers to come in, is what they said.
Yeah.
So that's the next
be
step,
dangerous.
probably.
Yeah, very well could be. Yeah, I agree. I'd like to see a few more Sageless tournaments, or not Sageless, but tournaments with Sage on these current patch notes, right? I'd like to see it play out a bit more. And I do feel she still has viability on Split of all the maps. I think that she can work there. But I would like to see a few more tournaments before potentially making the call to maybe readjust some of the nerfs to the other parts of her kit, specifically the wall.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's a good point to move on then. We can start talking about a little bit about the pro scene as well, because 100 Thieves, I'm surprised you guys didn't talk about this last week.
It's because it didn't happen.
It didn't happen last week?
No,
it was literally...
It came the day after.
The day after?
I think it was the day after.
Yeah.
I mean, typical. 100 Thieves have signed Steel. The Steel's back in the game. After obviously being barred from CSGO, and he's been moving around from game to game to game. He's ended up now onto 100 Thieves' Valorant team. They haven't announced any other players, have they? There's rumors going around.
No, I mean they have announced the first two of Hiko and why is his name
Nitro and Steel.
Yeah,
but they haven't announced the final two.
I like this pickup a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he had moved to a couple different games, but that was very brief. For the most part, Steel, despite being banned from the ability to play in Majors, the most important tournament in CSGO, he's still been competing in that game for years. He's been competing in that game while not being on teams that were even getting sponsors in MDL. Like, I think it was
team beat
at some point. Well, I was going to say in 2019, he played in MDL for the longest time with what is now the Chaos team, and they were just an unsponsored team called Ben's Anime Team, and they played for a very long time with no sponsor. And I mean, he's like a true competitor, right? He was just playing that whole time, knowing he can't even play in the majors, still grinding away in MDL, and then. With the latest iteration of that team, which is Chaos, he was developing this young star talent, Leaf and Zeppa, like two real upcoming NA talents, and there's no end game for him in CS. But despite that, he was still going hard and trying to improve the players on his team, trying to get good results, which is really admirable. And I think he's just like he is the truest competitor to me. So I just like having him in the scene. It's cool.
What was the last game he played in CS? Can you scroll across in his... Was it against 100 Thieves?
That wasn't the very last one, but yeah, they did notoriously beat 100 Thieves. What
was his team called? Chaos Esports?
Yeah,
bro, because there was that clip of Nadeshot saying, who the fuck is Chaos Esports? Because they beat his CS team. And now, now he's picking up the steal, I guess, right?
I was just going to say, I'd love to see him do a similar thing in Valorant where he actually gets this young new talent and develops them in the way he was doing with this last CS team, which was working wonderfully for that org, which is, it was like a smaller org, not a huge budget, and he was just developing these upcoming players. I don't see why he could not do the same thing now in Valorant with 100 Thieves, and that's what I'd like to see. I mean, at this point, they have 3 established vets. Get some
they need
young
some
talent in there.
Cracked kids in there as well.
Fortnite kids.
So some Fortnite kids like Zipan, just try and clone him and put 2 of them on the team. If anyone wants a really good insight into Steele's thought process as well, he was recently on the Valoranting podcast from Do Not Peak, and he did like a 20-30 minute interview with them, kind of discussing a bit of what he's been doing in the downtime, or in like some of his downtime from CS, and why he got heavily into Valorant, that kind of stuff. And something that he was saying is just he's been frustrated watching the top scene because especially in NA. I don't think from what he was saying, I don't think he's watched like that many of the games from the other regions extensively, but he was just frustrated with the lack of creative thinking from the pros at the top NA scene, which I love that. And from hearing like the tidbits of what he was talking about, it does seem like he's got fresh ways of thinking that aren't just cemented in CSGO knowledge. I mean, the guy's played at a top level in PUBG. He's played MOBAs casually at a top level. I think he played StarCraft casually at a top level as well. And I think he's just a very creative gamer. And I'm excited to see what this team comes up with, because it would be very easy to get stuck in your ways with 3 old established names from CS, but I don't think they're going to fall into that same trap.
You got to see him pick up 2 young guns, like you were saying. I think you got to see him pick up some young moldable talent you can work around, like what Immortals have kind of done. I think with Dicey, just having this up and comer, even if it's not purely from Valorant, and just bringing somebody up like that. Anyone with some raw potential, teach them the fundamentals from the CS background, and then. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see some success coming out of this roster now. It is a little bit disappointing that we're not... I mean, there haven't been any future announced NA tournaments, have there? It's like...
No, I believe that's the last Ignition tournament, so we were just waiting for the next bunch of them from Riot.
Yeah, it's a bit annoying because there's so many unknowns currently with the NA scene about how teams are performing, like FaZe, like 100 Thieves. I do need some juice pretty soon.
I do like that though, Bren, because if the next tournaments came tomorrow, 100 Thieves would be incentivized to rush their roster creation. Or they just wouldn't be ready anyway. I mean, I don't think they would rush their roster creation after fucking it up last time. But I mean, I hope not. I think that break is actually pretty good for us to see like the next evolution of the NA scene.
Okay. All right, let's shift it over to one of the most egregious pickups in recent history of Valorant. I cannot believe that this occurred, to be honest. And I might be throwing a little bit too much shade at their way, but Crashies and Food moved from T1 over to Envy. And is it Calypso and was it...
Calypso and
Akis? Yeah. Calypso and Akis benched. Now, there's nothing concrete about this, but there is the recent MDL match fixing scandals that's going on, whereas a bunch of players are currently being investigated as far as I'm aware. They said that this is directly not because of that, because it's a very dangerous.
No, they said that Aegis wasn't to do with that.
They gave,
really?
Yes, they said, I don't know if you have it, Kurt, but there's a tweet from envy_tailspin on Twitter, where he said his excuse for getting rid of Akis was kind of funny. It was like, well, we have a 6-man roster now, so Akis doesn't have a place with our 5, which is like, okay, so you cut him because he isn't good.
Right.
So they got rid of Akis. And then they just didn't give a reason for.
They didn't give. Oh, I thought they gave a reason for both of them.
No, they both specifically said as well.
Yeah, they said both players were
removed for unrelated reasons, just gave one for Akis.
So, which means that Akis wasn't removed for the. That Calypso wasn't removed for the same reason. Right? Like if you read between the lines here, the two were removed for different reasons.
Right.
Aegis was because they invested in other talent. Calypso is for a different reason. If you read between the lines, they haven't said it outright, but probably the most likely reason here is because of the NVL.
And also, even just to go further on that, there were a bunch of tweets from all the Envy players just gassing up how good Calypso was after removing Calypso. And how great it was to play with him, and he's so cracked and all that type of shit after removing him. Which, makes sense. He was a god-tier player in NA, I think. He was really good. It wouldn't have made any sense to have benched him, especially not... they were on the upswing. They were only performing
was one of the best players on that team.
And he was I think he was the best on that team. So, it's,
I think it's
a rough situation though for Envy because
of course
I would love to know what happened from the internal stuff here, but under the assumption that Calypso, they felt like he had to be removed for some kind of drama that's gone on. If we're running with that assumption, presumably they tried to attract some talent, but maybe crashies and food both wanted to come in. I don't know. It seems like a bit of a messy situation for a team that was trying to establish themselves and actually get better and better. They've now had to kind of pick apart, change roles, most likely as well, because food is now
moving. I think off of FNS. I think is moving off of the Cypher for crashes.
That would make sense. I would say that. That kind of makes sense. I suppose.
It's either one or the other. I can't remember the exact specifics of it, but and we do have to stress as well that it is purely just rumors that Calypso is involved in the MDL match fixing business, because you can't just make an accusation like that. It's also just it's a poor coincidence of timing with this news coming out and also Calypso being benched that people are jumping to these conclusions.
Well, listen,
but this
Bren,
kind of shit
if it isn't anything to do with the MDL stuff, then the organization has a responsibility to come out and say that it isn't, because that's such an obvious coincidence and connection of the dots that they're setting him up to get a fuck ton of backlash if it was actually true. The guy just didn't turn up to scrims or he fell asleep once. If it was something pointless, then that's on the org to actually come out and say that, because they're just setting him up for a fall if not.
Yeah, you cannot put these players' careers in the line, in my opinion. I think it's a little bit irresponsible, but the timing and the way that they've announced this, it doesn't particularly bode well.
So what do we think about the pickups here? Well, Bren, do you want to start? You had a fiery intro to this topic.
I think that this is super questionable. For one, the T1, all of the problems internally, obviously you can point to various stuff, but all of the leaked DMs were always Food and Crashies shit talking their team, which is just.
Wait, what do you mean by always? Didn't that only happen once?
Happens 3 times, I think.
Did it really?
It was either twice or 3 times, and it was Food and Crashies in separate occasions.
Okay, all right. I wasn't aware
I think
of
it was Food. Listen, it happened so long ago, and I don't give a fuck about drama. But this happened. I think one of the excuses was that Food was just relaying what someone else had said, and it didn't come from him. He was just repeating what somebody else said in a Steam community, whatever it is, Steam message. But yeah, it was two separate instances of this kind of shit talking going on internally. Those are not the kind of players you want in your team that are just, I don't know, just snaky behavior. You know what I mean? Like that is, I don't like that. You don't want your teammates to be like, you have a bad game, you have a bad scrim. You want players with that kind of team play attitude that know that it takes a bit of hard work to get to a working point. You don't want them fucking behind the scenes just messaging other people like it's high school. I think that's such a negative.
I think that's also some of the structure that a coach has to put in place as well. Like, you have to have confidence and trust in your coach that if you come directly to them, they'll sort stuff out rather than having to.
Kurt's found one of the messages here. So there's crashies. I think this was the latest one.
But this was the only one that I've ever seen. I'm surprised that it was another thing. But yeah, this is the one where Food said that he was relaying something that someone else said, right?
This is crashies.
Sorry, he's talking to crashies. No, this is Food talking to crashies.
Is this Food talking to crashies?
This is, yeah.
Okay, well, maybe I'm talking
This
was
the known one, though. This was the main one, which is the why they got rid of Skadoodle. He had poor communication. Even though clearly the problems with T1 extended to miles beyond Skadoodle not talking enough, clearly. Like, there are far more problems than that. But
just to summarize, instead of just talking out my ass about drama that I don't understand, I'll just talk about the pickups. I don't think it makes sense. It's already been announced that Food is going to be moving to take over the smoker role for Calypso. It's a role I thought that they would put him in, but I don't think it's going to be a good one unless he proves me otherwise. Crashies as well. I mean, Food and Crashies, I think, they were pretty underwhelming on T1. I don't think it's a hot take to say that.
I think it is. I think Crashies was the best player on that team. I think that
really?
I think so too.
Yeah. I think that in his Cypher role, I think that he was able to actually do a lot of work for a team that didn't have very much structure. I think that guy's got potential. Like, he could be a good player on a team that has more structure, a team like Envy. That's why I think it's a good idea to move FNS off his role, because he's a shot caller. He can build the system a bit more around him, but you want to put your new player Crashies on his comfort role, on the place where you've already seen he can have success on the Cypher.
I think T1 looked way better with Brax on the Cypher.
I think it was pretty. I mean, Brax was all right in that role as well, but I think there were just so many other problems with the way that the roles worked out that I don't think it was because Crashies was bad.
A lot of overlapping problems. Yeah. I mean, at this point, what are we even arguing over? I mean, when was the last time that T1 played? It was...
Pop Flash.
Pop Flash, early rounds, getting knocked out.
I am okay with Food on that team not being a duelist. I think he has probably far more potential on Smoke than he showing on a duelist in the previous 3 T1 tournaments. At least on the Smoke role, you would think inherently he won't be putting himself in those awkward suicide angle positions where he's just trying to out-aim 7 guys at once. I mean, he'll be actually playing a more passive game inherently, which I think would be a good thing for him because he has great mechanical skill. But when he was on the duelist roles, he was just playing at far too an aggressive pace, especially for how passive T1 were. But I'm actually okay with that. I just sort of worry about what they're going to do with FNS and Crashies, because I was really liking FNS on Cypher. I'm kind of disappointed to see him off that, especially in the previous tournament. He looked really good in the Pop Flash. He was going off. So I would have liked to have seen him on that still. But Crashies is a really good Cypher. So if you're going to replace FNS with anyone, I'm fine with that. And then maybe if they continue to run the Killjoy like they were on Pop Flash as well, maybe he can slot into that. I mean, I think getting rid of Akis, fine. He was never like a weak link on that team to me, but he was certainly their lowest performer. I think that's a certainty, right?
Yeah. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're underrating Crashies and Food a little bit. Like, when I've seen them, I think they've been really impressive, and I don't think you can, in terms of like role by role stuff, I'm not sure you can judge because T1 has just been chaotic.
Yeah, and they're also moving roles as well. So
yeah,
shifting the roles around for a couple of the players. I think that's fair. All right, I've been beaten down. I'll back off away from my Crashies and Food a shite point, and we can move on to talk about Bonk a little bit. Bonk have lost some of their key players, actually. I think is that an understatement? Here's the thing: I don't follow EU as closely as I do NA. I mean, Joe, you'd be the man to ask here. What do you make of these Bonk changes?
They have literally lost probably their best player in Sayf. Like, you can make the case either way between Sayf and Yasin, but I think it's probably Sayf, and that's a huge loss for them because, I mean, this is the thing in terms of the perception of Sayf in EU, and I think the perception of Sayf in EU, particularly among the Swedish teams, is that Sayf, 6 months down the line, if you wanted to make a bet on who would the best player in EU Valorant be, and you're not allowed to pick artists, let's say, it would probably be Sayf, because I mean, he's one of that class of players where they were incredibly good in CS, but they got a VAC ban when they were like 13, and they couldn't play CS because.
Is that what happened to him?
Yeah, from what I've been told by players and coaches in that sort of Swedish scene, he would most likely be on a tier 1 CS team if he hadn't got VAC'd. Like he's that good.
Interesting.
And it's all, so yeah, it's a huge loss for them. And Aron, I think, is also actually quite a big loss, because I mean, I like to make a joke about it that he's the 5th best Cypher in Sweden, because you've got you've got Bonka, you've got Meadow, you've got Fern, and I say the 4th one is Zydish, which is Aron's other handle. But he is legitimately quite good. Like I think there's a loss for them, but Sayf is a really big one. And I've not been convinced at all with Draken. Like watching him, he's played a lot of little tournaments of Valorant with various rotating teams, and he's not really impressed me at any point. And from what I can see, he will be taking over Sayf's role, to be clear.
Really? Okay. So that's the really interesting part to me, because I haven't been clued up on Draken. I'm not, delving down into like the, I guess like 8th to 20th teams that much in Europe. I normally like to stick up at the top because the bottom teams cycle their players around so much. So I'm not really familiar with Draken at all. I assumed he was coming in as a replacement for Aron to be able to come in and maybe play the 1-for-1 Cypher replacement, but you don't think that's the case?
No, if they were going to do it, or if that was, Bonka was probably at least top 3 Cypher in closed beta in Europe. Bonka is sick on Cypher, so if they were going to move anybody to Cypher, it would have been Bonka. But no, Draken is coming in like for Sayf in terms of that primary ult role, and in terms of probably the agent choice as well.
So for anyone that's not really aware of Sayf's style, that guy plays every hero. It's absurd. Now, I don't know whether there's some kind of record for the most heroes played across your career or something, but I think it's possible that Sayf would get it. I can't think of another pro player that plays that much. He is the only guy, by the way, that plays Viper at a top level repeatedly. And his Viper gameplay on Split, I think you can see, like, he's got 12 games recorded on Viper.
That's Lord's name is this.
And his stats are absurd, because not only has he specialized in it and his teams have specialized in it when he plays on Split, they have really good strats for it, but this guy's aim is unbelievably good. I mean, we are talking rifle aim like up there with the absolute best in the world. And it's somebody that hasn't had a chance to play on a team that's really gotten to the top level yet. I'm a little bit surprised that he's rated as like one of the players that could be the best in the entirety of the EU scene, but not that surprised, because he does seem ridiculously important for their success in terms of his flexibility and what he brings to the team. He's like the centerpiece of some of their strategies, and also just in terms of their fragging power.
The way you've described him to me, you've sold him to me as basically a non-one-trick Zipan.
A little bit, honestly.
Yeah, in terms of just the raw rifling, I mean, like I said, my EU knowledge is lacking, just because it's been a while since I think Bonk played, right? Last time they played, was it in the best of 1 tournament? That was going on?
I can't remember the name of the tournament, but it was the one previous Blast.
It's unfortunate because the Blast one was only 4 teams. I
can't remember the name, but it was the one previous Blast where they did beat NIP,
right?
And then they played G2 in the finals in the 02.
I think that was the Mandatory Cup.
No. It was LVL Clash.
Yes, the level clash too. I think there's an argument as well that Bonk should have been invited to the Blast Invitational. Now, maybe they declined some invite because they were revamping their team or something, but they are arguably the 4th best team, or were arguably the 4th best team, above NIP, and maybe even, you could debate whether they were there or whether it was Liquid that was there in that 3rd place spot as well. So this is probably going to be an enormous drop for them. If they're unfortunate to have not found a organization to be able to sign under before losing Sayf.
Yeah, they. I mean, to be clear, in my opinion, they were the 3rd best team in Europe. They were ahead of Liquid, they were ahead of NIP. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, they were undergoing some, because also in addition to Sayf and Aron, they also they've changed coaches now twice in about a month, because they removed Salah, who was their they didn't remove him, he left, but he left about 6 weeks ago, and they brought in Emil from Fabrican, and Emil's also gone now. Emil's actually gone with Sayf to NIP, it looks like. So, well, Emil is publicly on NIP, but if Sayf isn't publicly on NIP yet, but yeah.
I mean, that moves us on nicely. Did you want to say something, Wyatt?
Well, yeah. I just my question would be, and maybe you know this, Joe, but who exactly are dictating these moves right now? Because you would think that Bonk would have wanted to keep their 5 together and keep moving forward, because we've seen them only improve at this point. And I was pretty disappointed to see this news. I was really enjoying watching the team and seeing how far they were coming from a couple months ago.
I mean, my understanding is that it's probably just they couldn't get an org issue, and there's only so long because they've been around for a long time now.
Yeah.
I mean, to be clear, it's the eponym is right here, right? It is Bonka who is the captain of this team, and it's Bonka and Yesin who were generally driving most of the decisions. But yeah, I mean, I think this is they just hit. I think they just hit a point of exhaustion, unfortunately, because I mean they even have boot camps as well. They actually are one of the few teams who don't have an org who have boot camp in Europe. They did that a couple of months ago, so it's been a while coming, you know.
At the same time, though, Wyatt, if I'm an organization and I'm trying to make a top team, I would not have signed Bonk in their entirety. And that might sound like a bit of a weird thing, because they were, you know, 3rd, 4th best team in Europe right now. But because there aren't that many organizations already involved, you could probably build an even better team than Bonk. Like, if you mix around some of the pieces and took their best, there's potential for super teams to come and still challenge the likes of G2 and FPX at that level in terms of like their fragging power across the board. So I can see it from the organization's point of view as well, that they don't just want to wholesale pick up Bonk, and then for those players, they can't force Sayf to not just take a paycheck with Nip.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, but I think it's just my soul and my heart hurt thinking about Yassine and Sayf parting ways. It's very unfortunate. It was an exciting, dominant duo.
We've already, we've already kind of moved on to the next topic, which is the fact that Nip. Is this confirmed? I know it was rumored.
This is a double report from Halo of Thoughts and also Nell, which I think NIP have also announced or are about to announce.
Last time I checked, Nip hadn't announced it, but I mean, Nell is never wrong, basically, on this stuff. He knows these French players, right? So I would be shocked if this wasn't accurate.
Well, there you go. Yeah, hopefully, I mean, by the time this video is out and starting to go live, the news might be already out, so who knows? We miss a mark.
Nell also said in his report that the reason he had delayed it and the reason that Halo got the report out first was because he had been working with Nip to like schedule it alongside their announcement or something. So it would be very surprising if it wasn't true.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like a Halo thing to do. To jump the gun a little bit. So this has confirmed this to a degree. And what do you make of this then? Because NIP is a team that has been struggling kind of almost at this gatekeeping level in EU, where they've been kind of just at the level where they've been unable to break further forward in tournaments, but just barely scraping by. What do you make of them removing HyP? Because HyP was one of the central figures of this team back when the team was literally called HyP. Like it's interesting to me that they've opted to remove him and Fearoth as well, to be fair, because I mean, I watched the game recently. It wasn't magic on my screen, but it wasn't egregious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Key thing to note before we move forward, I just wanted to say, though, yeah, you do remember it from the HyP team, but NIP, from my understanding, the team was originally formed. They contacted Lucker and Rhyme, and they put the team together from there.
Right.
So they seem to be the ones doing the decision making.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're doing the decision making, but it was definitely a case of Lucker and Rhyme were the first 2 signed, and then they were looking to essentially add 3 to that, and so they went with those boys.
I always found the creation of this team to be a little strange anyway, because the roles didn't seem to have particularly been thought out, and even on HyP, I found HyP to be a bit of a player that was. He's been the entry role, essentially. He's been the entry main fragger, playing the Reyna, playing the Raze, playing these kind of things. Now, recently, if you've only caught their recent matches, you might be saying, Josh, what the hell are you talking about? He plays Killjoy. But that's been a recent change. He's primarily been this kind of entry big fragging player. And I just fundamentally don't think that that's a good idea for him for that to be his role. HyP isn't somebody that lights the world on fire with some crazy aim. He's not somebody that has the the like CS knowledge to be able to pair anyway. He seems like he's slowly getting a little more and more out of his depth as the game progresses. I think that a role change for him was required to be able to maybe recapture some of the energy, and then it just wasn't really working for NIP. Like, you can't compare HyP to any of the other big primary fraggers for any of these other teams that are playing the entry roles. He just falls completely flat. And while I still think there is a future for HyP in the European scene, I don't think it's on those roles anymore.
Yeah, I mean, let's put a point of clarification here, right? He's always been the entry role. He's never really been a big fragger. If you look at his numbers, he has been pretty bad for pretty much most tournaments he's played. I'm sure there's one or two where I think there's one or two early after the introduction of Reyna where he got the agent a lot quicker than everybody else and has some quite nice games. But for the most part, he's been extremely underwhelming. But I mean, the thing I think is really weird about it is, like, I think, well, one, I think Nip has screwed up here. I mean, but this is the thing. Nip have been so ridiculously impatient in Valorant. It's like I made a meme like today where it's just the ride never ends meme, and it's just all the players that they've kicked because I mean, this is the thing. People forget they got rid of Zipan in beta. Then
he was playing Sage for them at the time, though, wasn't he?
I don't think it was Sage, but he was.
Oh, wasn't
it? It wasn't Raze. It wasn't Raze because
he wasn't playing entry.
No, so they got obviously Zipan went. They got rid of Bonker and Yasin, who obviously have both proven that it wasn't really about them. Because I mean, to be fair, Yasin always looked good. I think there was a time where you could say, is Bonker one of those players actually like HyP, where he's not going to be able to adapt to this game because obviously came in very early. He's a former world champion in Paladins. But I think, I mean, time has proven that I think he will stick around in this game. But anyway, they got rid of him. They've not been patient enough with these rosters, and I kind of get it, and I kind of don't, because I kind of get it from the perspective of, okay, well, there's going to be a lot of player turnover this early in beta, blah blah blah. That's fine, but I kind of don't from the perspective of, well, you spent long enough. Like they spent weeks and weeks and weeks deciding on the final three for this team. And they spent weeks before that, obviously, thinking about, okay, do we getting lucky, getting rhyme? You had enough time to make a more informed roster choice than this. And I think particularly, I mean, obviously, Kreia is the big name of the bunch, fine, whatever. But I feel like the only way this was going to work was with the French free, and because with a full multinational team, the communication is going to be so difficult. I don't think it's going to work that way. Like that's a real big concern, particularly with the players. I mean, they're now looking at what Sayf, obviously Sayf and Chihuahua.
Yeah, he's the guy on trial.
Yeah, who has played? He's played a little bit in Western European teams, but he's most of his success was on worse players, which was obviously a CIS team. So I don't know how well that's good. Like, I think there's a lot of things they're not really taking into account here, and I feel like, okay, you can second guess the decision to go for this free in the first place. I thought it was a pretty decent roster, but kicking them, and particularly kicking them in a way where it's just like, okay, we're kicking them this early and being like, okay, we're just going to keep one of the French players and we're going to get rid of the other. I think that's a huge mistake. I mean, also, I should point out here, Fearoth, from what I was told, was the IGL, at least on HyP. So they've got rid of the IGL as well.
Yeah, that's the Fearoth change is the one that really is strange to me, because Fearoth's a very experienced player that was apparently teaching HyP a lot about just like CS fundamentals. He was pretty much like the second fragger on the team and always seemed to do a pretty decent job of it. Could secondary AWP if they needed him to as well. And he seemed like he fit his role fairly well. So it kind of seems like they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here as well. Instead of making small incremental changes, they're just saying, "Oh, fuck it, it's a nip shuffle again."
Yeah,
almost
a lot of
the
these
organization
changes,
has too high expectations.
Were these changes made before Emil came in as a coach?
These changes were made. Well, I mean, he came in, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So these would have been made.
These would have been made
tournament.
most likely from Emil coming in, making these adjustments.
I don't think Emil would have made the adjustments, though.
You don't think so? If the thing that we're complaining about is the fact that NIP have just been acting on a whim and making unstructured decision making, and we've come to the conclusion that he never really performed particularly well. Fearoth is a little bit weird because, like you said, he was the caller, so that's a bit of a weird change, right? And also from watching his gameplay, I didn't really see a problem with him. It seemed quite seemed quite okay across the board. But I mean, is this a bad thing that they've made these adjustments?
Probably so early on, I think. I mean, if you could just one for one, like for like, replace Sayf and HyP and see what that was like with Emil added in and make small incremental changes, I think that would have been enormous for them. Like getting somebody like Sayf in on this team is huge. But now you've almost like got rid of all of the development that you had made as a team. There will probably be role changes as well. I'm not 100% on that, but like, is Rhyme going to stay being on the Cypher? Yeah, they change roles all the time as well. It feels like a problem where they just haven't set the fundamentals in place. And every time you recycle a roster, you have to start back again at the fundamentals in terms of what roles are people playing, not just in terms of their agents, but in terms of like the actual role that you're playing. Are you lurking? Are you entering? Are you doing whatever?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about Ryan, by the way, I'm pretty sure he's number 2 in the most agents played because he has 8 agents played in competition.
Yeah, he's also incredibly flexible. Like Rhyme is one of the most underrated players, I think, as well in the European scene. People don't really talk about him very much, but the guy's very, very smart and able to pick up a bunch of different agents. He seems like one of those players that's good, but has gotten very unlucky. Not in terms of the people that he's played with, but the system that he's played in. They've never really figured it out, and he's always the fill guy.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I feel like that suits him. Like, he's not a guy who's going to suddenly. I mean, I might be wrong, but I don't think he's ever going to be like a superstar player. I mean, the reference I always use, I call him the James Milner of Valorant. Like, that is kind of his thing, right? So,
I'd love to get that reference, but I never watched the Premier League, and I don't think I ever will. I know he's a British footballer. That's it.
Yeah, I giggled. I don't know meat sports either. I was pretending. I was like, yeah, that reference. Yeah, of course. I understand. Anyway,
we've spent too much time in America, man.
I know.
Way too much time.
Let's talk then instead about the Blast Invitational. We've been mentioning it this entire time. It was the most recent major tournament that we've seen. From an EU perspective, there are only 4 teams that are invited. And I suppose we can start with the team that we've been briefly mentioning. Just done a deep dive on NIP, but Liquid as one of the teams that have come out. Liquid have had an interesting sort of couple of months, I guess, in EU scene, because it obviously started out as Fish 1-2-3 when it was Ardis. They were the dominant team at the time. They lose Ardis. Okay, how the hell do we recover from this? They managed to get Scream, probably one of the best riflers. It makes an argument for the best rifler in Europe currently. It's a hard ask because Europe has a ton of good riflers. But generally speaking, they've made it work and they've been comparable with the top dogs. But this most recent tournament showing, they came out, they must have stolen Krusty's crack pipe from the Overwatch scene because they were coming out with these no smoke comps and they were trying to make it work. And to be fair, I can kind of read that. I think some of you are going to be quite upset at the compositions they were running, but I'm going to attempt to play devil's advocate.
I'm ready to defend them. I'm ready to defend them.
I was ready to defend them. I was watching it and I was like, I could see the potential of this, but does anybody want to just first dissect what the fuck they were doing?
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, the funny thing is, I will defend the comps and I won't defend the team. I think Liquid are awful, and I think they're set up to
really.
Basically, yeah, I really don't think they're very good because I mean, the main thing is the screen pickup was not because. The thing that made them so good in beta was just that Ardis was a transformative player with the op. He completely changed the way that you could play the entire map. It's like, okay, great, we have 5v4 every single round. On defense, we have an entire site that they can't go into. And Scream's a good player, but Scream isn't aggressive like that, and Scream is not an op player like that. And they've really struggled to, and they've basically gone from being a one-op team in a meta where nobody was really, very few players were really able to use the op effectively in closed beta, to a no-op team in a meta where plenty of teams now are happy running double op, and that's made it really difficult for them. And that's why you've got the million blinds comp, right? Because the smokes don't. It doesn't work. Like this is the thing. They're not a team that really knows how to make the smokes work very well. With regards to that, they want to get into rifle range of you, right? Yeah. And the easiest way to do that is just to blind you a million times, because obviously you can kind of, I mean, I think that's the easiest comp to make would be you can kind of walk around, you can skirt around the smoke. If a blind is coming your way, you could attempt, I guess you could technically tend to attempt to dodge it in terms of, oh, I'm just going to look down, etc. But in real terms, no, you're having to move. You're having to move against the blind.
Yeah, that's the theory. That's the theory behind the comp, right? Is that it gives you these tiny windows of opportunity to use with the flashes. Like smokes give you much longer time to act, take positioning. That's the whole reason why smokes are very good, just to cordon off the map in that sort of manner. But flashes are very much brief moments of map control that you can gain at a moment at a time. I actually really like the comp, and I really like the Liquid as well. And I don't think that they have been too hurt by the fact that they don't have the primary AWP in the form of Artis. I thought they were really going to struggle, but they've showcased that they can make it work. It's a bit like the way the Sentinels play, where they're primarily based around rifling. And I think you have to be very disciplined around it, because if you end up just dry peeking corners into oppers, then of course you're going to get punished. But I think Liquid have showcased that they are talented enough to be able to play at a very high level, quite coordinated. They have a lot of lovely set plays, and they are very good with the I don't know how to really describe it. The microaggression, I suppose, in a moment. They can set up a play with two people who are up and adapt on the fly to whoever's up in a situation, and they work off of each other's utility very, very well. I like that about Liquid, and I think we haven't really seen the potential of this composition. I can see the potential of the comp, but I don't think they're meeting it.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I think there's some great points here, but it's the way that this team was built. I agree with Joe. There wasn't a proper thought process into adding Scream into the lineup. I think it was just Scream sick, let's add him. And so they've been struggling to find a style where they can win tournaments with purely rifles and with purely a team that isn't crazy aggressive as well. Liquid are a very methodical team. Even when they're playing with a billion flashes, they're not inting at you like Sentinels are. They aren't running at you constantly and fragging you down. What they're doing is flashing in and setting up two of them on the angle. So they'll flash you away from the angle, so you have to peek away. And by the time you get your one person back to holding the angle, there's two people there gunning you down. So it's like a very methodical map control kind of style, which is the same thing that they did when they ran the Raising the Rainer previously. But the problem is that they're always fighting an uphill battle with whatever style they try, because they don't have that upper, because they can't just play the most default basic style of Valorant. So even though I love the creativity from Liquid, and even though I think that they're doing a good job with the pieces that they have, it's almost like watching a team that's playing with a handicap at times, because they are a naturally slow, methodical, pick-based team playing purely with rifles. And I don't know whether that meta will ever come where their style is fantastic. That's absolutely something that could happen in one patch as Riot balances the game. But at the moment, it always feels like Liquid are fighting an uphill battle to find a composition that works for them. And it's not natural. They're constantly having to go against the grain.
I feel that with this particular comp, if they made one change, it would have worked significantly better, which is switching Eccles back to the Omen and then have Soulcast play Breach, and you still have 5 flashes, but you just have, like, you can even see in some of these clips that Kurt is playing, some of the previous ones when they were on attack, there are just some angles when you're hitting a bomb site that you just cannot cover with just people alone looking at them. There are going to be angles where an op is just getting a free pick when they're hitting the bomb site. I think that one slight change would have made a significant difference. And this is something we had both independently thought, Josh, about the Cryptic's Killjoy being a joy to watch. He was really good on it. I think
best Killjoy we've seen so far.
Oh, for sure. I think of all the Killjoys so far, he was by far the most thoughtful. It seemed like everything he was doing, specifically with the turret, there was actually a purpose to it. He wasn't just placing things just because he has the ability and he's going to place it. There was actually a reason for what he was doing and why he was doing it. And I would have liked to have seen them, rather than this Killjoy felt like an afterthought in this comp. I'd like to see them actually have that be more of a centerpiece of what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that if they were able to put themselves in more situations where they had more players alive getting into these bomb sites on attack, just better attacks overall from having angles covered by smokes on them, and then they're playing the post plants with the Killjoy with Cryptics, that's something I would like to see in the future. I think that there are some positive notes to take away from what they were doing, but for me, just that one change, I think, would be a significant upgrade to that comp.
I think, though, that change would also reduce some of the efficacy of their comp, because the way that Soulcast was using his Phoenix was, the ability usage that Soulcast was having was, immediately put him in some of the best ability usage that we've seen from Phoenix players, because most people don't use any of their abilities. They're just running at you constantly, and it's awful to watch because they're not getting the maximum value out of the agent whatsoever. But because he's forced to use his utility properly in this composition, he's finding very good walls to be able to act as smokes in these compositions. And for example, when you're talking about like bind, you can put a wall up in on B long to be able to get elbow control immediately, and nobody on site can contest you through that. It's like a long smoke essentially that you put up. Yeah, you have to be right next to it, and they know that you're crossing somewhat, counterable by a silver arrow in the same way that any smoke is, but they were easily able to get elbow and lamp control on bind by playing in this like different creative way. And they still do have jet smokes to be able to cover some angles. It's the retakes that really bothered me, to be honest, because getting into a bomb site, there's normally only some very small angles that you need to cover. But if you're pushing back in from the defender's side and people can be anywhere, that's where they really struggled. And normally that's a massive strength for Liquid, their retakes. Whereas you try retaking on bind without smokes, it's impossible. Whereas pushing in, you can be very creative, but retaking, it is just impossible to get back in if you can't smoke off long or hookah or showers or short.
I think as well, particularly with the retakes, this is a team that is suffering a bit at the hands of the 1.07 patch with the Sage nerfs. I think what Link was able to do specifically on retakes on Sage with his abilities was very significant to their overall retake strategy from what we had seen in previous tournaments. I think
God, this was painful.
Yeah, I hated watching that unfold. Oh my god, that was really nicely played by IP in a moment as well, though.
There was they actually played that moment back with comms as well later on.
Oh, really?
And someone, I don't know whether it was Eccles or Sliggy, their coach, had called for Scream to directly plant the bomb instead of sweeping the area because there was 8 seconds left. And so Stream just stuck the plant, and the guy that checks wood has an op. Or I don't think he even checked wood link, but he's like swinging towards it, and he had an op anyway, so he wouldn't have been able to clear it. So just a poor call that got followed through.
So. I'm not going to dive in, but I know the reasoning why, because I've analyzed the footage. This is not what we're here for, though. You know, not going to give you the individual breakdowns. I think we've had our say on Liquid's comp. I'm still pretty torn on it. I'm willing to give it another tournament or two. And the cool thing about Liquid as well is that something we found out from Sliggy's interview with Immortal Minds was that he forces his players, at least in Liquid, to play a variety of roles, a variety of agents all the time. Because from the way Sliggy described it was that he's pretty confident that there's going to be like a pick ban system, or at least a ban system in the game, given the frequency of agent additions to the game. Pretty soon, like within the next year or two, it's probably going to be the case where you're going to have some sort of ban system in place. So he wants his players to be flexible. And I can imagine that some of these comps come out and they're in scrims when they're scrimming. They find some success with these compositions, but they just haven't quite found polish with it yet. And this is what I'm kind of holding out for, is to wait and see, okay, are Liquid going to come out and say, all right, this was a fun little experiment coming into this tournament. It didn't work out. We thought it was going to do well in scrims, so we thought teams are going to be taken off guard of it, but in the end, didn't work out. Let's go back to something a little bit more default. That's what I like about Liquid. I think it's a positive for their team, because I think there's going to be a lot of teams out there that just are going to be stuck in their ways and not willing to experiment a lot. But it's a positive for me, at least, moving forwards of Liquid. But yeah, we can put a little pin in that one and move on instead to FPX.
By the way, as well, though, they choked this map away like fuck. I mean, Liquid should have won this, and it should have gone to a third map. They're 10-5 up, and I think like 10-6, and I think the next round or something. Oh no, it was the previous one. It was at 10-5. They lost like a 2v5 when FPX had 2 sheriffs, and they just massively overpeaked, and they end up, the economy gets out of their control, and it ends up being a really tight game that they lose. And Liquid did have opportunities to be able to. Okay, you can't say that they had opportunities to win the series because they didn't go to a third, but they certainly had opportunities to win a map and push it towards a third that they had a chance of winning. So I don't think that everything's lost for Liquid, but it's kind of difficult to theory craft a way that they end up winning a title.
I think that's the problem. Yeah, it's just lack of upside. Because you're always going to find ways to. Well, obviously the pejorative term is cheese, but it's good to see them innovating and finding their own style. It's just I'm not sure the upside is there. It's difficult to see them getting into a state where they actually are winning tournaments, and obviously that's the thing with this team and with the success they had in beta and with the amount that they're getting paid and so on. Your expectation has to be this is a team that can win tournaments, and I'm not convinced by that yet.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about then the team that they were playing against in this match here then, because Fun plus Phoenix, I love this team after watching this tournament. They are so sick. It's such a shame that they just couldn't quite clinch it in the end. And of course, the way the tournament worked out in the finals.
What the fuck are they feeding Angel?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, where did he find the Fountain of Youth?
I think this is maybe the 11th episode in a row I've talked about how much I like Angel in this game, but it's just it's unbelievable. What is he, like 62? And he's insane. He's the oldest player in the game, and he's unbelievable. It is genuinely such a cool storyline that he just couldn't find the success in CS for such a long time. It kept just coming slightly out of his grasp. He couldn't get the right team together over the past several years. His individual skill, it was just slipping. And then he plays Valorant, and he's just a god. It's
he's bopping.
Genuinely so cool to watch. It's such a great story. And it's what you love to see players coming from a different game achieve in a new game. Like, it's easy to look at the people who are trying to come over and get the quick check from the previous game in the early days and that type thing. But to see someone genuinely revitalize themselves, it's so cool, man.
I was such a big fan of FPX watching this tournament, of at least of the maps that I saw them play, which was a couple in the finals as well, and I watched them play against Liquid. But this was... I think this is a team with so much potential as well, and they've just only been getting better and better and better the more times we see them being showcased in terms of their ability to adapt in the middle of a game. My God. But their mid-game adaptations were so clean. If a team runs something against them, like a set play, and it happened previously in that game, they'll play around it. Like they've already got a read on what they're doing immediately. You cannot run the same thing, even if it's like 5 rounds in the future. You just can't. You keep running these shots in slow motion, trying to make our viewers ejaculate or something. Like, what's going on? trying to make them bust a nut when hitting these sheriff shots. But I think this team has so much potential. They are so sick to watch. And like you said, Wyatt, it's a perfect cacophony of different elements, right? You got the storyline of Angel, you got these young guns coming in as well, all these players just performing. Fortnite kiddos being led by Angel, the part-time fireman. That's what I like to call him when I watch him. He does look like he should be working part-time in a fire station.
Yeah, he does. He's got that very honest look about it.
Yeah. You can tell he enjoys a beer or two on the weekend.
What I think is incredibly impressive from FPX's performance in this tournament is that they got brutalized by G2 in the upper bracket finals. They got destroyed by them. And then they come back into the finals, and it's the closest that G2 has ever been pushed in
fact, if they...
ever.
I don't want to say in a match ever, because they have actually dropped like a BO2 during that's
group stages.
Group stages stuff, But yes, in terms of a BO3, BO5, whatever, they drew in terms of maps here. I mean, this was if we had more maps in the game, this could have been different. This is like one of the same like TSM versus Sentinels situations from FaZe, where, all right, Sentinels didn't come out with the win, FPX didn't come out with the win, but they played arguably better Valorant than the team that did. They just had the winner bracket disadvantage.
I mean, the funny thing is, I feel like I mean, going in, they should have also been favoured on. I don't know what happened on bind. They went down 12. They went what 12-0 in the half.
yeah.
And
No, it was horrific.
And I mean, I just don't. I watched. I still don't know what the hell went on there. But I mean, on paper, they probably should have been favoured to win bind as well. So this was actually a ridiculously good performance from that perspective.
I think when you look at the finals, though, when you dig into each map, Ascent was very much not their normal performance. They played hyper aggressive on defense. Angel is like using his ult to teleport into G2's spawn.
Did you see that set play, by the way?
Yeah, this is outrageously
but did you see what they
good.
followed it up with? It was so fucking smart. I don't know if Kurt will be able to find a play because it's so specific, and I can't remember what round it happened. But he smoked himself off from top mid, so that when they peeked in spawn, they couldn't see him TP in. But then they followed it up with the Sova ult as well to essentially clear all into spawn side. So it was just incredible. Angel was peeking at the exact same time, and when they tried to take the fight, they couldn't because they were getting Hunter's Fury from behind.
Yeah, but this is not the kind of stuff that FPX has ever done before on their defensive sides. They don't play like that. G2 are the ones that play like that, where they are constantly putting pressure on you on the defense, and it just led to G2 crumbling. G2 don't have these very solid set defaults when they attack. They're not a team that's going to absorb your aggression and then go with their own. They just expect that you're going to give them that respect. And FPX gave them zero respect and finished with a 9-3 defensive half on Ascent. That's by far and away better than anything that they've been able to do in the past. And it was just you could tell that they didn't want to use that in their upper bracket final and let G2 onto it, and they caught them so by surprise. And it was a fantastic adaptation, but then they didn't bring that into bind. They played the same slow-paced, methodical style on bind, and they got crushed because it was expected. It was their norm.
Yeah, it was really sick to see him, though. And man, watching this get played, it does make me wish for just more tournaments in EU, because EU is the region that's really bubbling right now. NA is kind of in NA's in a weird spot right now with a lot of teams in flux, and I want to see a tournament then once the teams are actually solidified. But in EU, at least, there is still these storylines that are going so strong, and I think if there was another tournament coming up straight after this, we would be in for a treat. But it doesn't seem like it thus far.
Yeah, I mean that's been a real problem actually with this is the thing. One of the things that, and again, a lot of things annoy me apparently, but one of the things that annoys me is we had such a vibrant scene for enclosed beta for EU Valorant, because I looked over at NA and I was like, okay, every org's picked up their team already. There's like 1 million org players, great. Yeah. The fear I had looking at that was, okay, well, if you have org players, you're not going to let those org players, like you're going to try and protect your brand a little bit. You're not going to play in every tournament. Like TSM were the only guys playing in these open tournaments, right? And in EU, it was like, okay, no one's orged anyway, but everyone was playing in every tournament except for Fish123, who kind of dodged a lot of tournaments towards the end of closed beta, but that's another discussion. But with Ignition, there's been mistakes in how Riot has sort of handled it in EU, mainly with communication, and we've seen a lot less of these smaller tournaments happen. Like I was talking, I think this was about a month ago, I was talking to one of the writers over at ESPN, and they was telling me, okay, like I've been asked to put together a top 10 ranking for EU, and I can't do it because there's been so few tournaments with Ignition, and also the fields have been super, super low. Like some of them have been great, obviously Vitality mandatory fine, but we played 6 teams. This had 4 teams. It's actually been a problem. I think it has hurt EU a little bit with regards to these smaller teams.
I would absolutely agree with you. I think that EU has been definitely hampered by some of the tournament formats that have been coming through, like these best of one tournaments.
The formats are dreadful,
horrible to watch from like a perspective from just a casual enjoyment of the game. You don't really get the same storylines as you do. In terms of tournaments being ran, Pop Flash so far I think has been the best in terms of the format. It gave ample time for the storylines to build over multiple days. It was great. Everything from top to bottom was fantastic, apart from, unfortunately, some of the teams. And that was really the only factor that was let loose. But I do think as well that we see this in a lot of esports scenes, and it's the growing pains of an esports scene. And especially EU, where the money isn't quite as rife compared to North America, where in esports, the money is always in North America. It's always been the case. It always will be, most likely, because it's easy to sell sponsors to a predominantly English-speaking audience. In Europe, it's a little bit harder to see which way the money flows for obvious reasons. I love that little fadeaway clip there. I think that was Shadows just leaning back. That man has the wobbliest death known to mankind.
And he's like 3 centimeters away from his monitor at all times.
Yeah. But just to finish my point and put a nail in it, I think that this is just growing pains. And hopefully, at this point, Riot obviously will recognize this, and the money being invested will go into the fact as well that you'll have proper formats being ran, proper tournaments. And I also think that this might be just a byproduct of, I suppose... No, actually, I was going to blame it on COVID. You can't really blame it on COVID, on the formats and stuff. But I hope it will be fixed in time for when COVID eventually fades and we start to have actual LAN tournaments being played. That's when we start to see some of these growing pains gone and out and done and dusted.
I mean, it's pretty much the best time to have fucked up formats when everything is forced to be online anyway.
Exactly.
The first LAN, people will have learned all of these mistakes. Now, should they have had to learn from them anyway? We've had decades of esports to be able to learn these kind of things. But hey ho, everyone seems to try and start at square one again. Something that I thought deserves a conversation, though, in this FPX G2 match is that FPX were expected to be massively improved based on this patch. They're a team that really didn't play with the Sage on any map other than Split, where Shao was doing a pretty good job of being able to play it anyway, and they tried to play without the Sage to see if that was viable, but Shao ended up not getting enough value out of the Sova. They went back over to the Sage. But it was kind of expected that this final would be closer, or rather the games in this tournament would be closer between G2 and the rest, because David P has had to learn a new role. And David P's basically been playing Sage, at least as far as I'm aware, since he started playing Valorant at a professional kind of level. So I thought on Haven, they did a very good job of bullying David P. David P was trying to hold Haven, trying to flash out aggressively. And something I noticed was... Meadow would be putting his cams in that A lobby room for late in the round so that they could check to see whether David P was there and flush him out with a drone and be able to get that pick and then develop into A hits. But it's still to G2's credit that they managed to come away with a tournament win despite having to shift their composition that they've run the entire time. Like, they've proven that they were flexible enough to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, it's a cool little series to see progress, and it's like I said, I'm a little bit upset that there's not going to be more tournaments, so we can see the kind of storylines that have been developing progress. I think there's a lot to take away from these teams, and EU seems to be the ones with the most footing underneath them as well. I mean, do you guys have any other final thoughts on the BLAST Invitational recap? We've covered pretty much every team. I mean, it was only 4 teams, so yeah, of course, we've covered every team.
I mean, the one thing I will say is Ardis is still the best player in Europe, and it was nice to see. I mean, it's a weird thing, actually. I'm kind of surprised that most of these Ignition tournaments haven't really done... It doesn't feel like they've done MVP awards or teams of tournaments and stuff like that. So, and Ardis' stats have been a lot more... Because obviously, I mean, this is the thing, we forget Ardis was playing Jet and stuff in... Fish 123. He actually has had to adapt to quite a more laid back role. He's not AWPing all the time. He's playing Sova usually. In some sense, he's playing a support role on G2. So he's had to make a massive adaptation, and it's a massive credit to him that he's done so well. But yeah, I mean, like, his stats have been a bit up and down, but he has some ridiculous games here, and he thoroughly deserves MVP, and he's still best player in Europe. Come at me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously with G2 winning, I don't think there's any other argument against it. Let's move on then, okay? This is our second last topic that we've got in here. And it's worth mentioning as well, for different reasons, but the FTW Summer Showdown, which was supported by Riot, which was the women's only tournament. It was 50 grand, I think, was on the line for this one. I don't think any of us got to watch it because it was on at the same time as some other prior obligations. Did you watch it, Joe?
I watched the final.
The finals?
It was... Yeah, it's an entertaining tournament. I mean, the surprising thing for me here is, as somebody who wasn't big into CS, but I did follow CS a little bit, is that you had a team with Miss Harvey and Benita on it, and somehow that team did not win the final. I mean, that's incredible, right? But it was an entertaining tournament.
You know who did win the final for any Overwatch League players? Overwatch League fans that are watching. Yeah, any Overwatch League players that are watching this? Andro.
Really?
Yeah, the woman who streams, or used to stream, a lot of Overwatch. I think she was on the Florida Mayhem as a streamer for a while or something like that. And she was playing on this magical team along with a 16-year-old woman called Jazzykins, who had by far and away the best stats of the tournament. And I mean, I don't know whether she's played CS before in the past, but she looked to, because she's so young and because she was dominating the competition in this FTW Cup, really feels like the kind of person that could break through to the potentially a tier 1 level at some point in the future if she ends up, taking it very seriously and wanting to compete on some kind of mixed team that is aiming to become tier 1. That's the kind of talent that you don't often see in these kind of tournaments, like a really young person just ripping through the competition.
I think as well, the reason I wanted to add this to the episode, I think, in terms of the topics, is because there's a kind of an underlying thought in the wider Valorant scene that I think has carried on from CS, which is...
Look at those stats! Actually, sorry, Bren. Look at the stats. Average KD from the tournament of 2.2 and 2.4.
Oh my god.
I was just slapping,
That's ridiculous.
It's actually ridiculous. But there's an overwhelming thought, I think, when I'm reading comments about this tournament from... maybe trolls online or whatever, but people saying, oh, why are they doing this? Why not just invest the money into a tournament for everybody? Isn't it sexist to do it just for women? You have to understand that, I mean, at least this game as well, I've got female friends who just refuse to use voice chat when they're playing Valorant for obvious reasons, because it's just unfortunately as well carried over with a lot of likeness from CS, that also same toxicity is kind of embedded in it. And in Overwatch, that does exist, but to a lesser degree, because I think it's a lot more of a welcoming game. Everything about Overwatch is built on that. And this is super important for Riot to make these kind of moves early on, to make it a very welcoming environment. You want women to be watching these tournaments, and you want them to think, that this is a possibility that they can play at a pro level. You want it to seem welcoming. These kind of events are very important for getting that on the map and make it feel like a welcoming space. And it's a very important step as well in sort of combating that general thought that is so invasive in just general rank, the general gameplay, which is, just inherently sexism, which has existed for so long, right? Yeah. So that's the reason I wanted to add it in, because I think it's important to talk about. And I mean, it's when you're 14 and edgy, it's funny to be sexist, I guess, because that's what you find to be the pinnacle of comedy when you're 14. But it's all important at the end of the day.
I think it's also just mind-numbingly stupid to not try and encourage women to get more into gaming and competitive gaming and competitive Valorant. Like, how could you possibly want a situation where you're excluding 50% of humanity from top level competition? Like, it's just stupid to not make those kind of moves to encourage it as much as you possibly can. It would just open up a whole new world of competition if we were able to fix the issues within esports to be able to encourage more women to get involved in that side of the space.
Yeah, and if you're not aware, some of the people that Joe had mentioned, like Miss Harvey, Benita, etc., these are NAXCS players who were playing at like the Div 2 MDL Prem ESEA tier. These are legit players. Like, these people are good. And I've never heard of Jazzykins before, but those are some ridiculous stats she's getting against some very good players. So that is I'm
really excited to see. Like, I Overwatch did a pretty good job at this, I think, to market the game in a way to appeal more to women. I think it has a higher percentage skewed in that way when it comes to the genders compared to most other competitive FPS titles. But I'm interested to see what Valorant can do, because the potential to get some like tier 1 talent, like somebody like Jazzykins, who would really be invested in the scene and get to that top level, would be enormous. I mean, in the Overwatch League, we had Gregory play, and we've had a couple of other people at the tier 2 kind of level who were playing in the Chinese scene as well. But being able to do that in a game like Valorant would also be just an enormous step for the FPS scene.
Yeah, sorry, I was just watching this clip unfold. I'm kind of in my own little world. Yeah, no, all very, very good points put forward. Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile to bring it up as well. The final topic that we've got here in the podcast, I wasn't here the last time you did this. It's the World Power Rankings.
We had to rush it.
You had
we
to rush it last time?
Absolutely rush it last time because Matt had to leave because he had some, I don't even know what he had to do. He had some kind of meeting or something.
Trimming appointment?
Yeah, beard trimming appointment. I mean, he wasn't even contributing because he doesn't watch European games, I think. So he was just like, oh, okay, sure. And we just blitzed through them. So the power rankings were basically just Wyatt's power ranking.
I just made a rough list like an hour before the show, like, oh, let me prep this just in case. And then we just went off my list. So,
oh, they got a little tier maker. I like this. Okay, so this is how you were doing it previously.
No, this wasn't my exact list, but we made some adjustments.
Minor adaptations.
Yeah, but with Joe on, who's made these lists before in the past, and with more of a serious time slot to be able to take for this challenge, I think we can do a bit of a better job.
Absolutely, yeah. I think at the top, is there any arguments that G2 shouldn't be at the top? Given the fact that they've won the most recent tournaments, I don't think so.
I mean, you can make the case for Sentinels, but I'm not going to make that case. So, yeah, G2.
Yeah,
I won't be either.
You could. I don't think Sentinels should be. Even if, I mean, there's no inherent way to tell, but I think in terms of the competition that G2 has to go up against compared to Sentinels, especially recently, I think it is just defaults to G2, I think, at the top there. So,
I think it bears, though, rehashing some of the reasons because, while none of us will play the devil's advocate argument in seriousness, there will be a lot of fans who think
Josh,
that the NA scene is better.
I was reviewing the games before we went live with this, and all of the comments were people saying, I can't wait till you get onto the NA versus EU portion because, I mean, NA should be the best region. And that was the overwhelming thought process behind it. So it's good to talk.
I think that's the thought process of a lot of fans as well. Now, I think partly this is because they're more exposed to that. The NA audience is more vocal. There are more people watching the NA tournaments, that kind of thing. I think when you look at the rifling skill across the board in the top 4, even 5 teams in Europe compared to the top 4 or 5 teams in NA, that to me is where the largest difference is. There are some other differences as well. FPX is very, very good tactically as well, whereas there's only really one good, maybe 2 if you include Gen G, as well as Sentinels, good tactical teams in North America. But in terms of the firepower, that's the kind of area where I think Sentinels just simply wouldn't be able to get away with their style if they played against European teams, because they wouldn't be able to have Sinatra just run in and kill 1.5 people every time he takes an aggressive play like that. Their style would not fall down, but it wouldn't get as much value. I would highly anticipate them not being as effective against elite level talent from Europe.
So the question is then, for number 2, the way I see this is that you're not really stacking them unless they're in that 11th spot, because they just go beyond that, right? You're actually doing one after the other here. Then we're not saying this as tiers, we're saying this is the actual rankings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we think that FPX should be above Sentinels?
No. I think that whatever gap there was between the 2 teams when we did this 2 weeks ago, after seeing FPX in the last tournament, I think you could argue that the gap has lessened.
Sure.
But I'm not going to jump out the window and put FPX ahead of them because we just watched them look good. Because
of recency.
I'm trying to, no recency bias. Go back a bit. Sentinels smashed NA in Pop Flash.
I think that's a very good point here, is to kind of dictate what this is based off as well. And I think that we should be taking into account performance over the course of the Ignition events, weighting the more recent ones more heavily, but not purely the most recent couple of events.
Sure.
Like this, the way that CS teams and the way that Valorant teams work, maybe Valorant will change a little bit faster over time when it comes to patches and stuff like that, and hero metas that'll develop, agent metas, but it'll still, your performance is variable over a period of months. It's not variable over the course of a week or 2. And any Overwatch League viewers that are watching this wondering why there's a total different approach, Overwatch League is very variable from a week or 2, depending on what hero pool you have available, what patch you're playing on, stuff like that. It does vary drastically. But with CS and with Valorant, I think it makes much more sense to take a more like a more holistic approach, long-term approach.
Yeah. Okay, so I think there's no arguments that FPX should be in 3rd, at least in this one. Now, the 4th spot is an interesting one because Liquid are coming off the back of I think by their own terms, a pretty poor tournament. Is there any? I don't think there's an argument for TSM to be above them. I don't think there's an argument for other teams to be above them. But does anyone want to make a case for it?
I mean, I mean, obviously, as the resident Liquid hate here, apparently I will make the case. Liquid have really struggled. If you go back and look at the tournament results, like it's not just been an aberration, right? I mean, looking at the results now, that they were okay. Got the grand finals at We Play, fair enough. They went out round of 16 at mandatory to a complete no-name team. Obviously, best of one, but even so,
Yeah.
they were okay at Allied Odyssey, but they lost to both G2 and FPX again, best of one, but even so. And then at LVL, they lost to Bonk and they lost to Skade.
Yeah, that was a very poor performance from them.
My issue is when we're looking at this list right now, how are we grading Bonk? Because given this last result here, I would potentially move Bonk up 2 spots, actually.
Well, yeah.
I mean, to be clear, also, if you guys remember correctly, I had Bonk above TSM in the last one, personally.
Yeah.
And below Liquid. But the problem is this Bonk roster move.
Yeah.
How do we factor this in?
I mean, I think that these rankings, if you were to take a snapshot of these rankings now, they should indicate performance over Ignition, not predicted performance going into the future. So I think it is very reasonable to still rate Bonk based on their prior roster and not the changes moving forward. I think that they should be viewed in that sense.
Yeah, I think, I'm in agreement there. And you guys were smoking last week when you put TSM above Bonk.
I still think, though, that Bonk have not showcased performances over the course of the entirety of the Ignition series, or even over the course of the last 2 months, that would grant them a 4th place spot in the world. I think that this has been a relatively recent, not just the last tournament, but the last few tournaments that have made Bonk look like arguably a top 3 team in Europe. But even that, I would say, is arguable and recent. Yeah. So I still don't agree that Bonk have been the 4th best in the world over the Ignition series, even if we're weighing the more recent tournaments stronger. I just don't. The wins.
It's close. I will say it is really close, and I'm joking, but I think it's completely reasonable to based on Ignition series, the totality of it, to have TSM above them. I think I am looking at that one with a bit more recency, where I do, and I also do think, though I don't know how that factors in. As I mentioned on the last one, I do think that if those 2 teams played, Bonk would win.
But the way I'm looking at this right now as well is that, Joe, you brought up the good point that Liquid's just been mad inconsistent, but I think you've got to take into account the piss poor format that the EU teams have been playing in, and the fact that NA has had a much better opportunity to showcase their skill compared to EU. And I think from what we've seen of Liquid, I think it would be, it's a little bit disingenuous, I think. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think Bonk at 4th, or do you think Liquid based on because we are doing this as a cumulative sort of overlook of the entirety of the Ignition series. I don't think TSM comes into it because they have had better opportunities to showcase their skill, and they've looked drastically up and down over the course of many Ignition series. I don't think they come above Bonk or Liquid, but where do we want to put Bonk and Liquid? Where do you want to solidify them?
Well, my question about Bonk would be, at what point do we think they really became the strong team that they are now, or rather were with their previous roster? Because once you start digging back to like a month and a half ago, you're looking at their performance in like Absolute Masters, where they played against middle of the pack kind of teams and then lost. I didn't watch this series, but they lost a 2-1 in the grand finals to Acceptis. And that's, with the same roster, with Sayf, Ziz, Yassine, all of those players. So these are kind of losses that are arguably worse than the losses that Liquid's had over the same time period, like the loss to Bonk and Skade. Okay, Skade are a pretty unknown team. They only have Latex from the former Fabricant roster that I was really aware of as a talent, but Bonk have not showcased the kind of consistency over the same time period of the period of months. So I think Bonk were on the rise, but I don't think they've fully risen over a long enough period of time to be able to confidently place them at that level. Like, in my opinion, I would have Liquid, TSM, and then Bonk, because I think that I personally think TSM have showcased over a longer period of time a top level ability within North America. Like, they've dominated North America, and the only team to rival them has been Sentinels. Okay, they've had some fuck ups in the group stages of tournaments as well. They lost to Dignitas twice in the most recent Pop Flash event, but they have undoubtedly been the number 1 or number 2 team in North America, whereas Bonk have been on an ascension process, and you have to take into account the like bottom part of that curve over the time period.
To be fair here, I mean, Bonk have been showing up well for quite a while. I mean, really going back to Vitality European Open, where they should have actually qualified for playoffs against Party Parrots. It was a 2-1, and this was when Party Parrots were arguably a top 3 team in Europe. And they had that problem at Absolute Masters, but they need more DM and a decent Prodigy lineup on the way. They did well at Mandatory. They did well at LVL. So I mean, I take your point. I think you can make it either way. I personally I'd have Bonk higher, but I think you can make it either way. I do think they've been around longer than you're giving them credit for, though, with regards to being considered at least a top 5, if not a top 3 team in Europe.
Yeah, fair. I mean, that's your area of expertise as well, because I haven't watched all of those like smaller level tournaments. So I'll definitely take your point there.
I think if we're comparing TSM and Bonk, I think that what seals it for me is just the level of competition that each team are playing and the amount of times TSM have just fucked up against a lower tier team on the world rankings. Either at the beginning of the tournament or they'll just get bodied by Cloud9 in a semifinal. That's just happened too many times where their best 2 results were FaZe, obviously, great showing. And then previous to that, it was the Nerd Street tournament, which was like 2.5 months ago at this point.
It was a while ago, yeah.
So
it was a long time ago.
I can understand what you're saying perfectly, Wyatt, but I think that our audience is not going to understand why we're rating the NA teams so poorly when we say stuff like you have to consider the competition that TSM have been playing against. I mean, why isn't a win over, like the Gen G, Immortals, C9, these kind of teams that TSM has been beating with regular or at least reasonable regularity, why aren't they weighed as highly as Bonk's wins over? As Bonk's wins over like Nolpenki and stuff, you know what I mean? Like, what is it about the North American scene that we need to, I think, articulate the thought process behind that a little bit more? Because while I agree that the European scene is stronger at the top level, what are the reasons why we're doing that?
Here's a great example. I think Gen G is a great example of this. They were, for me, in the 3rd spot up until really the past few weeks. They were in the 3rd spot in NA for almost the entirety of the Ignition series. I think most of us would probably agree on that, right?
Sure.
Compare the difference in firepower of Gen G, who are a solid, sound, tactical team, one of the sound teams in NA who've pretty much always been consistent. Just compare their raw firepower to the firepower on Liquid. Rifle to rifle in each role. The difference is astounding outside of maybe GMD, right? And that's a team that Bonk is able to beat. I just think that once you go past like the really just past Sentinels, the level of rifle skill in NA just drops very hard for the teams in a across the board sense. I think just...
And of course there are outliers, right? Like TenZ is an incredible rifler.
No. Yes, and again, across the board. If you look at Cloud9, TenZ, sick rifler. TSM, Drone, sick rifler. These teams, GMD on Gen G, really good. There are really good riflers on this team. It's just not as good. I mean, look at Liquid. Their full roster of riflers. It's ridiculous compared to some of these teams. So I think when you're matching them up, maybe I'm thinking, in my mind, maybe this is where the disconnect is. I'm thinking fairly significantly about the direct matchup and how I imagine it would play out. And maybe that's not being weighed as not being weighed as much as I'm kind of weighing it mentally when I'm thinking about Bonk, because I'm just imagining how these matchups would go against a TSM, against a Cloud9. I
think it's a fair comment to say as well that the level of play in Europe is, generally speaking, a little bit higher than North America. I think for the longest time in North America, we saw some of the limits of strategy was they would smoke long A on Haven and flash out of it, and like that was like for the longest time that was their set plays. Whereas EU was always EU always had a kind of like, I think, the lead when it came to understanding how to use utility, to clear out areas, to clear out sites, to work together with different agents, whereas NA has always been catching up to that. So for the longest time, it has felt like a little bit of catch-up. We obviously haven't seen that difference. That difference is only viewable if you're absolute fucking neats like us who are watching every single match. Like, that is the only case where it's going to be visible. If you're a casual NA fan, you're going to be finding it hard to believe. You're like, why would these organizations be throwing money at these teams if they're not as good as European teams? Unfortunately, that's the way the world works. You know, I think that's a very real scenario for probably a lot of people watching this that feel like NA is being discredited, but I think that's the reality of it. And so
I can't say it enough. If you just take away the names of the players and who they are, if you just watch a top tier EU rifler, you could pick almost any from one of the top 3 teams against a top team in NA. The small nuance in their rifling skill, the small differences are actually very astounding.
Yeah.
They are very significant. There's just a level of rifling in EU right now that is higher. They're better at, more so than NA, they're far better at incorporating when to tap, when to burst, when to go for a spray, their control, their ability to place the crosshair in the right position. It's very small details, but every time I watch EU, it's the most profound thing to me that I'm noticing consistently.
Yeah.
I mean,
it also...
Sorry, but just, I mean, think about the 5 players, even on FPX, and their rifle skill. And that's the second best team. And then compare those 5 rifles.
Who's the worst rifler on FPX?
Probably Shadow.
Yeah, I was going to say Shadow, probably.
Yeah.
And then even still, it's just unreal levels of skill.
And the second best team in North America is TSM, and you're comparing Shadow and Cutler.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
it
really is a world of difference, like an unbelievable world of difference. The other thing as well that I want to say is that part of this also factors in my opinion, into why opping has been oppressive in North America for a lot of these teams, is that they don't have the rifle skills to be able to wide swing or double peek an opper and consistently get that kill. Whereas in Europe, you can see from watching Mixwell when he streams these games that the guy has to actively play scared of some of the top riflers when he has the op. He's scared of angles where Zipan and Angel and these guys are holding, because he has to be very quick with how he's taking the angle and then disengaging. He can't hang around in an angle for long or play predictable positions, because he's going to get pre-aimed and destroyed, even though he's the one with the op. So I think that that's something that goes over a lot of viewers' heads as well, is that they see oppers like Wardell, and don't get me wrong, Wardell is an unbelievably good talent. He would be great if he was playing in Europe as well. But they see Wardell and people like that getting outrageous work done in North America, and they assume that the level of firepower must therefore be higher in North America because they're seeing this crazy shit happen. But I think it's actually counterintuitive. It's the complete opposite. The area where the oppers are going to dominate least is the area where the riflers are the most potent.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, frankly, the biggest condemnation I can give of NA Valorant is that NA Valorant made us think that breach buffs were necessary. So thank you for that, NA.
Yeah. I mean, that is absurd. I mean, it was only GMD that was playing it.
Yeah. Where are we at currently?
Back to the power rankings. Yeah, I thought that was a very necessary tangent in order to explain why TSM is at number 6 behind Bonk, because that's going to definitely attract the ire of the internet unless we lay out our foundation very thoroughly.
Yeah,
very true. But okay, so how do we feel then about right now the Liquid versus Bonk? What is our final?
For me personally,
I think it is very close.
I think it is very close. I would have to give the edge to Liquid on the basis that of their consistency at the start of the Ignition series and their inconsistent results. I don't want to weigh as heavily because of just the nature of the format being best of ones, best of twos, things like that. Just not very good to showcase skill. And Bonk have looked better in recent times, but yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what.
At the same time, though, Liquid have had to reinvent themselves multiple times because they're not getting the success that they want. So even though I feel like we're overrating Liquid based on the eye test, based on the potential we can see in that roster and the skill that they've got, and the fact that they're able to, play other teams very close up at the top level, but they don't have the results.
Out of all of us here, Joe has watched the most EU, so I'll leave it to Joe for this decision, I think.
Let's keep Liquid fourth, just because I remember the Liquid always fall for memes, and I want to preserve that. Bring that to a new age.
Okay.
I do think that there is definitely an argument. I'm going to speak up for the oppressed NA masses here when I say that TSM have won 2 of the Ignition events in North America, one of which was directly away from Sentinels, who are, you know, getting a lot of respect in our rankings here. And so I do feel like if titles meant anything in these power rankings, if actual achievements meant anything, then they have been robbed a little bit at number 6. But I think that we're basing it more off the eye test and how we feel about the fundamentals and the strategy and the rifling.
Yeah, I think the difference is tiny between 4th and 6th, in my opinion. So
I would certainly agree with that.
Very negligible differences. Beyond that, though, anything else?
Do we want to leave it as is? Because it's tough because TSM have won 2 50K tournaments, 2 of the biggest Ignition Series events.
So if we want to talk titles, though,
yeah,
I think in the COVID world, with all the titles being online, all the things being online, it's not LAN events. You're not playing it with 0 ping. There's all these discrepancies, these variables that you need to account for. And I actually think the earlier into a scene you look in the esports scene, the less weight you need to apply to titles, unless it really matters. Because in the early days, players and teams can get away with a lot. And you don't really start to see that baseline level of strategy needed to compete at a tier 1 level until at least a couple of months in, which is now what we're starting to see in Valorant. We're starting to see this. Hello? We're starting to see this now anyway. And that's why I feel like I need to add less weight to TSM's Ignition results, because it happened at an earlier point when people fundamentally were kind of not really understanding how to play against some of the common stuff. Like, I think TSM were quite a one-dimensional team when they were winning those titles. They were coasting off the back of Wardell's incredible individual mechanics a lot of the time.
Well, wait a moment there, because that applies to the T1 Nerd Street Gamers tournament for sure. But the other one, the FaZe Invitational, was when we'd already seen that evolution come into the scene from Sentinels.
Yeah.
And they came out and just beasted them with specific
FaZe was the turning point. FaZe was absolutely the turning point, and that's why they're not in 10th.
And they won that one, though. That's why they're not in 10th. You're far too cruel to the poor NA viewer.
Yeah.
I think that TSM have showcased an ability to put together strategy that can beat teams that are, generally speaking, more tactically better than them. You know, they've showcased an ability to be able to beat. I mean, they beat Sentinels on Split, which looks like maybe Sentinels are, you know, one of, if not the best team in the world at that map. So I think that TSM are getting a bad rep here, because even though the rifling isn't the greatest, you know, Drone I really respect. Sabros is pretty good, and then it falls off a cliff a little bit with Hazed and Cutler. Hazed was playing really smartly in the FaZe Invitational, and the way that they were playing their team strats showed that they can win series against top teams like Sentinels. I would not be surprised if TSM had the ability to be able to take games off FPX, or, you know, possibly even a G2 the first time they played against them before G2 figured them out. TSM can put that kind of stuff together. They've showed that in the FaZe Invitational when they won. Right. They won the upper bracket final and the grand final.
I would agree with that. But it's always just going to be coming from the point of view that it's an upset at the end of the day. And they could beat those teams on a map here or there. I can see them coming in with some solid counter strats, and if it's a game where Wardell is just just popping off as he does, could see it.
But making an executive decision. We're locking in this top 6 because we've got to finish up pretty soon.
Okay. All right.
We do have to wrap pretty soon. Pretty soon afterwards. So, how do we feel about this bottom selection here? Because at this point, I mean, it pains me to see Immortals in 10th, but they kind of did it to themselves a little bit.
I would like to get Joe's opinion if he's watched any Japanese or Korean Valorant, because it's an area that I would love to dive into, but I simply haven't had the time with Overwatch League going on at the same time. But we have Jupiter and Vision Strikers on this list because they're the teams that are dominating those regions, and I do think that they are probably somewhere in the top 10 if I had to guess, but just based on results, but I haven't really watched enough of them to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I've not so much watched so much of Japan, but I have actually watched a little bit of Korea, and to be honest, I feel like Vision Strikers probably come in at 8th on that list, above Nip and Genji and Immortals. The talent there is ridiculous. King is an absolute beast on Cypher, and I mean, obviously, never bet against. I mean, when Jin Air's top right now, never bet against the Koreans in any game ever. I genuinely think Vision Strikers probably, because I don't think the case for the teams below them is really that strong, including NIP. I feel like they probably are they're top 10 in the world, certainly. I feel like they could be 8th easily.
They're almost there by default, the NIP and Gen G and Immortals kind of teams, right?
Yeah. And I think you probably can credibly put Vision Strikers over them. Like, obviously, the only problem is Vision Strikers haven't played that many tournaments, but even so.
I am down for that hot take, especially because it bumps Immortals, Bren's favorite team, down to 11th and out of the top 10. Because even though I really do like Immortals, fucking Packing 10 made me get a Valiant logo shaved into the side of my head, so fuck that guy.
So Vision Strikers are at 8.
Yeah, they were at number 8. Joe had
Cloud9 is still in 7, which I think is fine.
Yeah.
They've beaten TSM a fair amount of times.
What about Jupiter?
Joe was saying he didn't.
I haven't watched enough, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen enough.
Do we feel comfortable locking this in? I mean, I don't. I'm on the Immortals payroll, but
do you think that they're better than NIP?
Does Gen G have an argument to be above NIP? I feel like, Gen G won one of the very first tournaments. They didn't win an Ignition series, but they won. What did they win? They won
the first Pulse Arena.
Very long time.
It was about 2 months ago. They won Pulse. They beat Sentinels in that, but that was just as Sentinels were about to hit their peak. That was the tournament before they started winning everything. So that,
the question really is,
though,
what has NIP done? Right? Like, they have been 4th by default, the gatekeeper kind of team in EU. I mean, I say 4th by default. It's really 5th by default with the ascension of Bonk. So
yeah.
Could flip a coin.
They did beat in that BO2. I believe they beat, who was it? FPX, I think, or they took a map off FPX and they beat.
I'm gonna
someone could fact check me before I'm just going to say some wrong shit and run with it. But
they weren't. I'm looking at Allied now. They were they tied with FPX, and they tied with like Giants, so that isn't that impressive.
Tied with FPX, they've lost in 3 maps to Bonk a couple of times as well, taking a map off them. Lost in 3 to Fish123, lost in 3 to G2. So they're able to take maps off the top teams, but they've not really solidified their position. Yeah. I feel like the case for Gen G is stronger. I'm happy to bump the EU team down a little bit, try and equalize this.
My problem with Gen G is here. They're running phase. They got 4th, which sounds pretty good on paper, but they had a really easy bracket, and they got wrecked by Immortals twice. And then in Pop Flash, not a great showing once again. They lost to TSM in the 4th BO3 against TSM in a row. They've never beat TSM in a BO3, and it's never even been close. Though they've had some pretty decent showings against Sentinels. They pretty much beat all the other teams in NA at one point or another. So my issue with Gen G is I rated them so high up until FaZe and Pop Flash, where they just could not show up, which is pretty disappointing because I like that team a lot. I like the way they play. I like the players on it. I'm a fanboy. I'm on the payroll, but I can't. I don't know. I'm having trouble justifying putting them above NIP. If we're gonna go in terms of skill, which I mean, even NIP's skill. I mean,
all right, Wyatt, you're the one who has to make the decision here.
I have to make it. No, Josh, you're making this decision.
I'm going to put Gen G above. I think that when it comes down to firepower as well, I don't think the firepower argument extends as much to NIP as it does to the other top European teams.
Agreed.
They aren't carried by, especially if we're rating their former roster as well without Sayf. Remember, this is not a look forward to the future where hopefully they'll be a little improved when it comes to that kind of aspect. Yeah, I think that they would be on a similar kind of level, and Gen G's tactics I've been impressed with. I mean, they've made some recent changes, and I've just realized that their logo looks like ovaries. But yeah, other than that, pretty good.
Is this a hot take? Is GMD the best player on either of those two teams? Is he better than all the players on NIP? Is that a hot take?
Yeah, I think that is a hot take.
Is that a hot take?
I think that's a hot take. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms
Korea's
of
pretty good.
I mean, Korea's pretty sick. I mean, it's just he hasn't performed as well in the last couple of tournaments where he's pretty sick, and I think, to be honest, Luck is probably better as well, even though he's been super inconsistent.
Well, I'm going to stick with it. The check just cleared. So.
Let's get one final look at the top 10, and it's locked in. This is our world power rankings, except not world because none of us watch Latin America or Asia. So I mean, North America and Europe kind of to a degree, but yeah. Yeah, I don't want to speak for Joe.
Oh yeah,
actually. Joe
what
actually
happened to
doesn't
that
play much.
Game Landers team? Actually,
They've
just
just
didn't
been
play.
not playing. Really, the other team I'm interested in Latin America from Brazil is Team One, who were a MDL really solid CS:GO team, and then they just a couple of those players had switched over, and now they're playing Valorant, and they're looking solid as well.
Okay.
I mean, I've watched games here and there. I'm certainly not an expert on that scene by any means, so I don't feel confident throwing them into the mix. Though I feel if we took the time to watch that scene more closely, maybe Joe has. I'm just going to speak for everybody without knowing, but
I coach in Brazil and I actually do speak Portuguese, so I've watched a little bit. And
oh shit!
There you go.
Team One are pretty sick. Toninho is actually what you call it in Brazil, which stands for Little Team One. But yeah, QCK is the best player on that team, and he is legitimately just ridiculous.
Yeah, he was sick in CS as well. But yeah, Brazil looks to have, which is expected, but it looks like they're going to have some sick teams. So.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I've got to put an end to this because we've got to record some more stuff. But yeah, I think this is a very solid episode, gents. Joe, thank you for joining us. Thank you for bringing your expertise. I know it's pretty late over there in Blighty. I mean,
2 a.m.
I haven't been there in a long time. You know, I'm losing the will to live here in Cali. But thank you very much for joining us. Your expertise was very appreciated, I think, this episode. And that'll do it for episode 10 of Clutch or Kick. So we'll see you guys next week. We're going to try and make this a more weekly thing. I think if the news keeps flowing, if the spice flows, then there will, what's the saying, Wyatt? If the spice flows, then so will gold, I think is the way it goes. So there, see ya. Bye.
Well, that was gold.